Whenever I have a microphone, I have this weird urgency where I want to sing Whitney Houston covers. I've had that ever since I was a child. I won't do it. I'm going to read the title story from my collection. It's based on a swamp that I used to pass on road trips as a child in eastern North Carolina, a swamp called the Great Dismal Swamp. I'm fascinated by swamps. I like to think of them as some of the last wild places. They're not convenient to develop property on, and so they sort of retain this size and scale and wildness that appeals to me. This is called Birds of a Lesser Paradise. I fell for Smith the day my father hit his first hole-in-one on his homemade golf course. Dad had spent years shaping the earth in our backyard until he had 2 holes that landed somewhere between an extravagant mini-golf spread and a Jack Nicklaus par 72. "May," my father yelled, hoisting his 9-iron into the air. I did it. He was a couple 100 yards away, and because I didn't think my voice would carry, I jumped up and down a few times and clapped my hands, trying to appear visibly thrilled. But I was self-conscious with Smith standing behind me, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his army green cargo pants, an anxious scowl on his almost beautiful face. Dad sauntered off to pluck the winning ball from the hole, long white beard trailing in the wind, his spaniel Betsy 2 steps behind. It was hardly 50 degrees out, but Dad was wearing shorts and hiking boots. He was nearing 70, but he had the bulging calf muscles of a man half his age. "I want to see birds no one else has seen," Smith was saying. "I printed out the checklist for North Carolina. How soon can we mark these off?" "Slow down," I said, smiling. "I don't know if I can tell a common goldeneye from a loon," he said. "Is that important?" He followed me to our picnic table, which was soft from rot and green with moss. Smith stuck his fingers into his bramble-thick hair the color of seagrass. It seemed inclined to one side, like a plant reaching for the sun. He wore a paint-flecked t-shirt covered in a school of dolphin fish. "First," I said, "let me tell you what we can see here in the Great Dismal Swamp." I opened our brochure and pushed it toward him like a menu. We had a chunk of land outside town that had been in my father's family for 2 generations. We lived in his ancestral home and ran Pocus and Birds, our bird-watching business, from the property. "In April," I began, "birders can expect to sight 50 to 100 bird species in the swamp." "Are you reading backward?" Smith asked. "I have it memorized," I said. I studied his face. His left eye was deep brown, his right hazel, and for a moment I wondered if he had a glass eye. "Eyes like David Bowie," I said, nodding in approval. "Are you going to take me into the swamp?" he asked. He smiled. He was lean and dark from the sun. I couldn't tell if he was 25 or just short of 40, impoverished or on the receiving end of a trust fund. When he smiled, he looked like too much fun to be 30, as if he wasn't tired of the world yet. "Typically," I said, "we help our clients assemble the correct gear and map a course, and we drop you off at daybreak." I took a red pen from my pocket and circled an area near Lake Drummond. "The best nesting sites for warblers are here," I said. "What do you know about songbirds?" "I want to go in with you," he said. Dad was born on the outskirts of the swamp at a time when it was desolate, hard, and flecked with ramshackle hunting cabins. His father had been into timber, and Dad was raised wild, the kind of man who could pick up a snake by its neck with the confidence I'd exhibit picking up a rubber version in a toy store. He was sentimental about his family home and the town. Anything he was used to having around, he wanted to keep around. So when the town got too small to sustain a post office, he converted the blue mail drops into composting hubs in the back corner of our lot. He bought the abandoned elementary school at auction for almost nothing. No one wanted to pay the taxes on it, and looters had already taken the copper pipes and pedestal sinks. He rented it out for birthday parties, weddings, and to local artists for studio space. And when a developer leveled the city park, Dad reassembled the jungle gym in our side yard near the garden and let the scuppernong vines go wild. We lived in a dying town with a dwindling tax base. I never thought I'd come back, but the swamp was in me. And if Dad was half feral, I was 1/4. I liked the way the water tasted, the sound of birds outside my window in the morning. A few years in Raleigh studying conservation biology at the State University and I needed to find a place where I could look out my window and see nothing man-made. I missed the smell of things rotting, the sun bearing down on a wet log. Nothing in the city seemed real to me. It was fabricated, plastic, artificial, fast, and after years of biology, every come-on was a mating call, every bar conversation a display, a complicated modern spin on ancient rules. I didn't believe in altruistic acts. I could find a selfish root to anything. And eventually I felt as if I was looking out at the busy world, and I could see nothing but its ugly bones. I was taught that at the heart of all people, all things, lay raw self-interest. Sure, you could dress a person up nice, put pretty words in his mouth, but underneath the silk tie and pressed shirt was an animal, a territorial, hungry animal, anxious to satisfy his own needs. At least in the swamp, there was no make-believe chivalry, no playing nice. It was eat or be eaten out there, life at its purest, and it's where I wanted to be. Another thing, I loved my dad. I'd never known my mother. She died just after giving birth, so he was all I'd ever had. He was honest, fun, and unapologetically himself. I'm not asking you to come home, my dad said when I approached him with the idea. You won't find a husband here. He added, I don't want one, I'd said, and for a while that had been the truth. Perhaps it was all the years I'd watched my father carve out a happy life alone. When I moved from the city to the swamp, the things I could not have became special again. Cappuccino was special. Driving 40 minutes to eat second-rate Indian food was special. Planning a day around the good grocery store, special. You got about half fancy living out of town, Dad told me. I was a 36-year-old single woman living in a poor man's theme park, running birding trips into the swamp. Most of my binocular-laden clients were pushing 80 and were just as concerned with sunscreen and hydration as they were with spotting a pileated woodpecker. I drove them into the swamp in Dad's pickup, left them with a map, a bagged lunch, water, a GPS device, and a phone, and picked them up at twilight in a place that seemed less wild every day. And for the most part, I was happy. Can I offer you some water? I asked Smith, walking toward the main house, the farmhouse in which my father was born. What I don't understand, he said, is how you band a royal turn. Netting, I said, fine netting. Or find the juveniles before they flee the nest, which they do quickly. I brought Smith into the kitchen. Even though our house was a mess, the old juniper paneling made it smell clean. The downstairs consisted of 3 rooms. Dad had taken out walls and combined the kitchen and living areas. On the countertop, cups brimmed with pens and cooking utensils. We piled old quilts on top of threadbare chairs and sofas for the cats and Dad's dog Betsy to nest in, dirty paws and all. Photographs were tucked into dusty frames of older pictures, and the doorway was lined with mud-caked boots and waiters. Dad kept a bulletin board heavy with dried snake skins, maps, and articles on the ivory-billed woodpecker. He still believes they exist? Smith said excitedly. Some days, I said, but most people know they're extinct. I know. They're sightings, Smith said, mostly Florida, right? They're just seeing the pileated, I said, or maybe a sapsucker. People catch sight of a big bird like that, and they see what they want to see. At that moment, Dad came in. As he opened the door, the maps and clippings on his bulletin board flapped wildly. Who's this? He said. Smith extended his hand. Smith Jones, he said, bird enthusiast. If you like birds, Dad said, moving toward his computer, you'll love this video. Dad had just discovered the internet. He pulled up a clip that set the ardent mating displays of birds of paradise in New Guinea to Michael Jackson's Billie Jean. The birds, dripping in vibrant plumage, skated across branches, flicked their heads, and called like wild fruits to the heavens. And Dad slapped his thighs, and laughter filled the house. His laugh was unmistakable, almost an affront. Smith smiled. He didn't look uncomfortable. Want a beer? Dad asked. Smith nodded. As Smith brought the bottle to his mouth, I noticed his full lips, and I imagined them sliding down my neck, grazing the back of my hand. I pressed the cool bottle to my forehead. I had to laugh at myself, the way lust had crowded my judgment. Still, I was lonely enough not to take a good-looking stranger for granted. It could be years before one appeared again. That a spaniel? Smith asked, nodding at Betsy. Something like that, my dad said, gun-shy and made of God knows what months. His eyes like a woman, Smith said, reaching down to scratch her chin. Betsy shoved her tender brown nose into Dad's thigh. She rarely left his side except on birding expeditions when she was crated. She was a slave to her instinct. The spaniel in her needed to flush birds. The woman in her wanted to please my father. Her eyes were a piercing amber, knowing. Dad rubbed her ear and gently pulled a bird from her coat. "What's this?" Smith asked, touching a black and white photo on Dad's bulletin board. "Broken-necked bear," Dad said. "Fell from a tree slicked up with honey." "There are hundreds of bears in the swamp," I said. "Go in for a few days and you'll see one, I promise." "Maybe ivory-billed woodpeckers too," Smith said, raising his eyebrows. "It's possible," Dad said. His voice quiet and serious. I shook my head. "Not a chance," I said. "I've seen one," Dad said. "Years ago, when I'd been out in the swamp for 3 days, I had started to feel a part of it then. I hadn't spoken to another human being in hours. I was ready for it. You know what I'm saying?" Soon, it was like listening to two men speak excitedly of buried treasure. Their shared enthusiasm was evident. Smith and my father conceived of a week-long expedition in the swamp. If there was an ivory-billed, they would hear it, find it, and record it. "Here's a reward," Smith said, scanning a site he pulled up. $50,000. "Nothing short of 3 days in the heart of the swamp will do," Dad said. "While we're at it," I said, "why don't we look for unicorns?" "Get excited," Smith said. "It could be the definitive canvas of the Great Dismal. We could know for sure. We already do," I said. "There's no question. They're gone." "It is possible," Smith said. "Give us that. It's not," I said. "Don't be a black cloud, honey," Dad said. It always sucked to be the realist. I put out olives, crackers, and a block of cheese for supper. Dad passed out a second round of beer. Eventually, Dad excused himself. He liked to read for an hour before going to bed. I dug out the Scrabble board and unfolded it on the floor. "You play?" I asked. "I will," Smith said. He sat cross-legged on the floor, his beer beside him. He cocked his head to study the board before laying down his letters. He wasn't clean-shaven and his whiskers were ash blonde and gave him an innocent look. I flipped on the radio. The silence was too provocative. Dad kept it on the oldies station. He loved Motown, but lately it occurred to me that the men singing these songs that Dad and everyone else around had been listening to as long as I could remember, "I'll Be Around," "Be Young, Be Foolish, Be Happy," anything by Ben E. King, they were dead or dying. These men could sing about love better than anyone, but now they were long past loving women, and this impotence depressed me. Bernadette by the Four Tops was on. To be Bernadette, I thought. To be a muse, to inspire jealousy, to make a man shout into the microphone, "You're the soul of me." "Another beer?" I said, walking over to the refrigerator. "Please," Smith said. There were interludes of mindless banter between plays. Smith inched closer, and I noticed the strings tied to his wrist, the tan line on his arms revealed by short sleeves. "Lauper, he spelled it, as in Cindy," he said. "I'm not sure that counts," I said. "Where do you live?" I asked. "I'll pick you up in the morning to shop for provisions." "Unfinished neighborhood," he said. "Builder put in all the septic, cleared the lots, put up a clubhouse and a pool, and built 3 spec homes, and then, boom, foreclosure." "Did you buy the house?" I asked. "What do you think?" he said, laughing. "Squatters' rights." I shook my head. I had no idea what this man was capable of or what his values were. Perhaps he'd known about the reward for an ivory-billed sighting, and that's why he was here. The swamp was as good as hope as any. My attraction to him was instantaneous, and I worried it was palpable. He moved in close as if he was going to kiss me, and perhaps he read the panic on my face because he pulled away. "I went to school with the builder," he said, standing up. "See you in the morning. Turn right 2 lights after the old post office and you'll see signs. There's only one inhabited house. You can't miss it." I drove into Smith's abandoned neighborhood at 9. The sidewalks were overgrown and the swimming pool was green with algae, thick with debris. The clubhouse at the heart of the development was unfinished. The windowsills were unpainted. The screen door leaned against the stained stucco. Sewer pipes were stacked next to grass-choked for sale signs on weedy, empty lots. A sign advertising the development featured a toddler in sunglasses reclining on an inner tube and a slogan, "Home is here." It also said, "Satan lives," in red spray paint. I couldn't see Smith when I pulled up to his house, so I idled the car and dug out an old tube of lip gloss. The car door opened while I was homed in on my face in the rear view. "It's not like the world can't tell what's hiding underneath," Smith said, sliding into the passenger seat. "And besides, you have nothing to hide." "I didn't see you coming," I said. "That," he said, pointing to the clubhouse as we drove out, "is my command central. I put a mini fridge and my radio in the office there. I don't cook, though, because the oven isn't real. The just a plastic facade the builder put up when he ran out of money. It's quiet here, I said. I have my cats, he said. I let them hunt the place. You like it? I asked. No real expenses, he said, shrugging his shoulders. Got a car out back, no plates though. Drive at my own risk. Got an old cow skull glued to the front. He laughed. Do you have waders? I asked. You're going to want something like that to keep the mud out of your pants in the swamp. And you know, in case you surprise a snake, there are snakes. We drove to the Army-Navy store. Dad has a tent you can borrow, I said, before going in. Smith shopped quickly. He high-fived the buzz-cut clerk and paid cash for a pair of cheap gaiters and insect repellent. We started the drive back to his house. You know the elementary school? I said. The empty one? Dad owns it. Got it for $1,000, I said. It's beautiful inside. You want to see it? We parked in the untended lot, now raised and broken by tree roots. My heart raced as I unlocked the enormous double doors. Smith ran his fingers down the marble stone with the date the school was built, 1917. The sun wasn't on the building yet, and the brick walls kept the place cool. Our voices bounced off of wooden floors the color of honey, floors scarred and gashed by hundreds of small shoes, sliding desks. Smith grabbed my wrist and pulled me into the dark classroom, where the ceiling tiles heaved with moisture and outdated maps curled against a chalkboard. After years alone and long stretches of celibacy, I'd forgotten how it felt to be flipped on like a light, to try and concentrate when your blood and heart were screaming inside you. I leaned against the cinder block wall. Smith put one hand above my head and closed in on my face. I hadn't been touched this way in years. I gave him my mouth and tilted my head back to keep the hot tears in my eyes from spilling down my face. I wanted to keep them to myself. I worried they came from something awful, like gratitude.